This is all about
Thank you all for coming. This panel we decided to hold this panel at the paper when we heard that Joel Rogers, one of our guests tonight, was going to be in town. Joel is the founder of the New Party, and I'll be introducing him in a minute. We first heard about the New Party at the Independent. Well, let me actually give this to you kind of chronologically. When we started the paper 6 years ago, local politics was pretty much controlled by a group of people who we might describe today as conservative Democrats. The phrase I hadn't heard before was they were cops and curbs Democrats. They were interested in taking care of basic services. They didn't really have a grand vision for the city, and they sort of derided people who did. And that's fine. They were good at their jobs. But there was a group of people in Missoula who wanted to put forward a more progressive agenda. And they were very active, and they worked really hard. And one of the things that they did was they got a hold of us at the paper, and they were very well organized. So we would get lots of phone calls. We got lots of information about what they were doing, and they started to run candidates for local office, and they were very successful. Within a few years, there was a solid progressive minority on council. A very progressive mayor ran for office and won. And I'm going to keep this very short. This is not even qualifying as a history. This is a very impressionistic sketch. But after a few years, this same group of people dropped by the office and started calling and letting us know that they were going to do something new, that they had decided, they had heard about this thing called the New Party, and I think maybe Seki will give you some details about how this came about. And they were now calling themselves the New Party. They were organized as the New Party. And they began to run candidates under that banner, and again, they were very successful. And at this point in history, I believe Missoula probably has the record for the number of city elections that have been won by New Party candidates. I think they've won all but one of the elections, or one of the seats that they've sought. As I say, for me, the interesting thing was that it was the same faces. It was the same people. They were saying a lot of the same things. They were the organized Democrats. They were the ones that were pushing things, that were really active. And they were now calling themselves New Party. And they didn't quit calling themselves Democrats, by the way. So recently, I've noticed, and those of us in the editorial department at the paper have noticed, another thing starting to happen. And it's something that I feared. It's something I'd seen happen in a town I had lived in 15 years ago, where a progressive group of people essentially took over power in the city. This was in Santa Cruz, California. Is that there was a backlash. And before the backlash happened, there were murmurings, there were rumors. People started talking about, in Santa Cruz, they were socialist feminists. That's what they called themselves. It was a different kind of town. It was a different time. And they were able to get elected under that banner. They were socialist feminist Democrats, as opposed to New Party. I've been seeing the same kind of thing happening in Missoula lately. Recently, in the county commissioner's race, I believe it's possible, and I think some people would offer this analysis, that the Democrat lost because people were mumbling and complaining that he was one of those New Party Democrats. Now, again, this analysis is about as thorough as this history. But at the same time, I think a lot of people who pay attention to local politics heard that rumor as well. And there have been lots of other rumors like that happening. And it just became a question for me. I'm a journalist. I'm more interested in questions, really, from my own self than answers. And the question became the title for tonight's panel. And that is the Democratic Party, locally and nationally, representing its historic constituency? Or do progressive Democrats need a new party? And so what we have here tonight is a couple of progressive Democrats and a couple of people from the New Party. In today's Missoulian story, I've been told that it described tonight's proceeding as a debate, and this is most certainly not going to be a debate. This is going to be a simple panel discussion. It's going to be a conversation. You'll be asked to join in the conversation. There's a couple of microphones down here. As I say, I want to keep things casual, and we'll just see what happens. I'm going to introduce our panelists tonight. Carolyn Squires, sitting to my left, is a nurse, or a licensed practical nurse at Community Hospital, a member of the AFSCME union. Did I get that right? Right. She's been a nurse there since 1967, is that?
It's about 1968.
68. And since 1987 has been one of Missoula's representatives to the Montana State House of Representatives. Sitting next to Carolyn is Pat Williams, who needs no introduction. But as we know, I described him in one of the press releases that I sent out this week as one of the last great liberal Democrats. I didn't ask his permission to call him that.
It's like an open.
That's how he meant it.
You'll take that one? Okay. Sitting to Pat's left is Seki Fashion. Seki is a longtime activist, union activist in Missoula, and currently is the head of the local hotel and restaurant employees union. She is also a member of the National New Party Steering Committee, which has some fancy name that she can tell you later if she wants to. And to her left is Joel Rogers. Joel is a professor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He is the founder of the New Party. He is a writer as well as a professor and a lecturer, very prolific at both of those two endeavors. And I just love this, so I have to say it. Jay Waljasper at the Utne Reader called him the most important political thinker in America who you've never heard of. And he has some interesting ideas that you'll get to hear. Did I get that one right? I think I got it. That's close. Now, from my point of view, what the New Party has done is presented a challenge to the Democratic Party. New Party people will tell you, we'll work equally with Democrats and Republicans. And I don't blame them for saying that, but maybe they work with Republicans somewhere. I don't know. I'd like to see the list. But since the New Party, in my mind, and I got to organize this thing, is presenting itself as a challenge to the Democratic Party, I thought that it might be just good to set things up that way a little bit tonight. I'll ask Joel to speak first. Seki will then follow. Pat will then talk, and then Carolyn will speak. And afterwards, as I say, I hope that you'll be lining up at the microphones to ask questions or make comments. Thanks. Carolyn?
Oh, you wanted me to start? I thought.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's right, Joel. Thank you. You were listening.
Oh. I mean, I folded the paper over to take notes. So.
Thank you, Eric, for that lucid segue. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. So, thanks, Eric, for the introduction and for setting the thing up. Thanks to the Independent. I guess thanks to the University of Montana, right? If you have a lot of taxpayer dollars used to spend a building like this, it's good to use it for something useful every once in a while. And I'm still navigating this cord here. And I'm honored to be on a panel like this. I mean that seriously. With Seki, one of the, you may not know this about Seki, but one of the really leading new, certainly one of the hottest organizers for HRE outside of Las Vegas or California, widely considered.
I invited all my friends.
And widely considered, one of the next generation of really substantial national leaders, who also happens to be a woman, a good thing, in the labor movement. And Pat Williams, who, I don't know if he's the last great liberal, but was, certainly a great liberal. I've followed Pat for years. You don't know this about me, I used to work with the Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee in Feinstein. Admired your work for years and years in the House Subcommittee on Labor Management Relations. And then Carolyn Squires, who's off there doing God's work in Helena, God having an overdeveloped sense of irony at the moment. So these are all good people, and we have much more in common than we have apart. And I want to echo what Eric said at the beginning. This is not a debate, it's a conversation. and I just want to talk about what the conversation is about, what I see the conversation is about. I see it basically not about new parties or third parties or the Democratic Party per se, but about a certain set of values, widely identified as progressive values. And I was talking to someone at the Daily Missoulan today, and they said, well, what's a progressive? I don't know what a progressive is or what a liberal is or whatever. You know, how can you use these terms? So let me define my terms precisely. Progressive is somebody who actually believes in democracy. Somebody who thinks that that ordinary people, properly organized, can run the government, and that if they do, the results will be much better than if somebody runs the government for them or runs the government at them, as often happens at the moment. And progressives are, you know, sometimes associated with Looney Tune views, but as I'm using it, I mean people who are committed to pretty basic values about the ordering of this society, who believe that, for example, kids born in this place, which is supposed to be dedicated to some proposition, should have an equal start in life, irrespective of the wealth or the race of their parents. People believe that each generation should try to conserve the earth in some sort of shape to pass it on to the next generation. People who think that, you know, what your sex happens to be, what's between your legs, or how you make love, or what color your skin is, are ethically irrelevant things and want to judge you by the content of your character, and that opportunity should be widely available to all. People who think that, as a general matter, the fact that, you know, if your daddy or mommy was born with a lot of money or you were born into that family, that doesn't give you some sort of privileged right to tell other people how to run their lives. Who believe that working people have rights of organization and the First Amendment, which extend into the workplace. People who believe that government should be clean and accountable and should actually function. That their taxes should be used in efficient ways, that we should pay the price of civilization, namely taxes, in progressive ways, based on our ability to pay. These are pretty basic views, nothing too adventurous here. And these basic views, it's the first thing I want to say. I guess I want to say four things. So just to tell you what I'm going to say, and then say it, and then tell you what I said. I want to say that these basic values are losing out in American politics. And then I want to say that that defeat is unnecessary. And then I want to suggest a way in which, or what's required for us to win, for those values not to lose, and describe the new party as trying to implement that sort of strategy, and then say something very briefly about what that would look like. And then I'll turn it over to Seki to talk about what we're trying to do locally. Okay, those basic values are losing out in American politics. That's the first proposition. I don't know if it requires much defense here. Carolyn can give you the ugly details in Montana. Certainly nationally, you know that you know, there are lots of successes out there for progressives. We're always claiming success of one sort or another. You know, we organize 10 workers into a union here, or 1,000 people there, or open up a battered women's shelter, or make some sort of small advance. But I think the facts speak louder than those small victories. This is a country that has, in the last 20 years, managed to wipe out all the gains in equality that the post-war generation bequeathed us, all of them. We now have a distribution of wealth which is approaching France in 1789. We have the highest level of inequality and the most maldistribution of wealth in the developed industrial capital world. We have the highest rate of child poverty in that same world. 1 in 4 kids is living in poverty, 1 in 2 black kids lives in poverty. We have the lowest rate of union organization and the lowest rate of voter turnout in that developed world. So very low levels of citizen mobilization. Our major population centers are turning into charnel houses. We've got 3.5 million kids, for example, growing up in neighborhoods where it can be said that more than 60% of the adult males between the ages of 25 and 40, more than half of them, are detached from labor markets altogether. And if you look at that seriously, that has to be taken as some substantial defeat. And this defeat has been going on now for some time. It's not as if this is something that started in 1994 with Newt Gingrich's ascension. And of course, Newt is now declining a bit. You know, the higher the monkey climbs, the more you see of its ugly side. But it didn't start in 1994. There's been a long secular decline in those sorts of values and their realization. And at previous times in American history, we've done better. The New Deal, not to be nostalgic about the New Deal, the Great Society, not to be nostalgic about the Great Society, both represented substantial social efforts to widen opportunity, to extend civil rights, to increase the possibilities of getting the benefit of social cooperation from a large number of people. And that stuff is gradually getting reversed. Okay? That's proposition 1. I hope it's beyond great controversy. Proposition 2 is that that defeat is unnecessary. In fact, it is the case that a very substantial portion of the population share those sorts of basic values. There's a series of issues that you can look at, be it issues around closing off the low road on industrial restructuring that the U.S. has pursued over the last 20 years of declining living standards and increasing inequality, and putting in some new sort of basic wage floors and other sorts of supports for people, or paving the high road, reordering the economy in a way that reflects our values a little bit and has us, if not running the economy, then at least running with it instead of being run by it all the time. Campaign finance reform and clean government, investing in children, investing particularly heavily in education, leveling up rather than leveling down on trade, protecting Social Security, minimally extending the welfare state to include national health insurance, which in fact enjoy very, very broad support in the population. All of those things, for example, poll at a rate of 60 to 80% in the general population. And none of those things is being systematically advanced by either of the major parties. Another way to describe this is that the same sorts of forces that have made American politics ugly, vapid, stupid, increasingly corrupt, and subject to public cynicism in the last several years, namely a generation, an unprecedented generation of economic decline and a failure of government to do anything about that, which have led to the Reagan Democrats and then the Bush Democrats and then the whatever Democrats, et cetera, and the whole defection of non-college educated voters from the Democratic Party. Those same sorts of forces have generated an enormous potential market for what could be the signature issues of a new progressive politics, a politics which recognized the difference between the 1990s and the 1930s, not to mention the 1960s, but which was still interested in advancing those basic values of democratic participation and opportunity that were associated with those times. There is vast implicit demand out there for imposing some values back on this economy. There's vast demand out there for developing structures, not necessarily only within the government itself, for making those values actually work in the economy and for enabling firms to compete in accordance with those values under real-world competitive conditions. There's a market, in other words, for a progressive politics. But in order to reach that market, we have to change our practice, I think, or we think, in the new party. Those people who self-consciously hold those progressive values typically engage in only two sorts of political activity in a really determined way. They do single-issue advocacy around one or another issue, or they do retail organizing. That's that battered women's shelter or the union or whatever. But except in the most exceptional of times, most people are not going to be reached by that sort of high-intensity politics, except in the... And in conclusion, yeah. Well, denuded of a microphone, we are, yeah, all right. So we're still... Start over. Yeah. It's really good to be here with Pat Williams. He's not the last liberal, but he's a great liberal. Okay. You know, liberals are often defined as people who, on principle, don't take their own side in an argument. Never been Pat's problem. Never been Pat's problem. Where were we? Oh, yeah. Well, we've got sort of low levels of mobilization of high-intensity people or something or other. We've got union organizing drives and issue campaigns. But except, again, in the most exceptional of circumstances, that's not where you're going to find most people. The only political activity that most people in America, indeed it's not even a majority of Americans at this point, it's not even a majority of the eligible electorate at this point, but it's certainly millions and millions and millions of more people that engage in those other sorts of things, do engage in, is voting. And so you need, if you want to advance those progressive values in some way, to have some way to reach that market in a way that's actually going to reach it, that's going to actually be out there in those electoral arenas where people can, in fact, show that support that we know from the pollsters and other things that, in fact, they have. And so then we get to the issue of an electoral strategy. Now, one way of thinking about the electoral strategy is what we should do is, wait for the Democrats to sit around and nominate somebody and then go off and vote for them. And then afterwards, when they go south on us, we can complain about their perfidy. And this is, as a practical matter, the standard progressive answer to the question of developing an electoral politics. So in 1992, you get sick of several years of Bush and Reagan, and you vote for Bill Clinton. He's saying, well, we're going to invest very heavily in kids. We're going to have infrastructure up the kazoo. We're not going to worry too much about the deficit. We're going to lower interest rates. We're going to do something sensible on trade. We're going to increase environmental standards, et cetera. And then when he does the reverse on each of those things, you say, that's too bad. Let's wait to see who they nominate in 1996. And then you go and you vote for Bill Clinton again. That's the typical strategy that's pursued. The idea behind the new party is that there might be some sort of alternative strategy that would be available. A strategy which would take seriously the barriers of entry to third parties in American politics. It would try to avoid the so-called wasted vote syndrome, that is, tirelessly offering elections or candidates with no serious chance of winning. It would avoid the spoiler problem. That was the problem of dividing things on your side of some ideological divide in a way that advantaged the far side. That would take seriously its own immaturity and the pathetic weakness of all of us, even when we combine forces. But to try to come together in some way and actually start running people for office at the local level at first, and gradually climbing the greasy pole of politics to the point where we could become the new majority party and run the United States of America. We think this is a worthy and plausible ambition, and we saw all manner of human happiness that could follow from it. After all, if we ran the government of the United States of America according to the values that I was enunciating before, that would move, the greatest economic and military power on earth in a direction rapidly different, or quite different from the one it's now inclined. And the gravitational pull of that on European relations and what happens in Asia and what happens in the developing South, et cetera, would also be beneficial. So we think of ourselves not only saving the country, but saving the earth. But how to do that? Well, the thought is that to do that, what you've got to do is you've got to focus on message. Focus your message, sorry. You should go on offense. You should get some sort of structure out there to keep the people who are trying to do that in touch with one another. And then you should plunge into those electoral arenas, again, starting at the bottom and gradually working up. In terms of message, our message is pretty basic. It's a fair economy and a real democracy. And it includes those 5 or 6 elements that I mentioned before. You level up rather than down on trade, you invest in kids, you educate forever, you extend the social welfare net a little bit while taxing it progressively, you rebuild cities, and above all, you close off the low road and help pave the high road and connect workers and firms that are stuck on one to the other. And whether they take and you clean up government. And whether they take the form of initiatives on campaign finance reform to get elections not for sale but actually democratically funded, or living wage campaigns, or free space, or what's the initiative here called?
Open space.
Open space initiatives, or reductions in subsidies to sprawl, or conditioning economic development grants on people paying a certain sort of wage, another form of living wage stuff, or being environmentally sensitive, or encouraging first source agreements on cities, and trying to have guard against privatization in different ways, and building up unions, or whatever. That's what we've been out there doing. To go on offense means that we should say that we're here and we're not going to go away, and we indeed have some values. We're not going to sacrifice the idea of having values to the right. We have values. We are willing to take our own side in an argument. And to make a move that you might describe as a sort of jiu-jitsu move or some sort of move in terms of defining ideological space that gets away from some of the dangers that Eric was warning about at the outset, or the dangers which were exciting the questions that he was claiming to be uniquely interested in, or thinking he was interested in. When you think about how conventional American politics is mapped in the media, it goes like this. It's mapped on an axis that runs from a liberal to a conservative end. And the liberals are understood as big government do-gooders without any popular values but toleration. Not a very popular value these days. And they've never met a government program that they don't like, and they've never met anybody from whom they would expect some serious contribution. They don't have any sort of real developed sense of social order or social responsibility. So those are the liberals. And out here you've got the conservative end, and that's understood variously as sort of free marketeering rich people without hearts, or ungodly fundamentalists who are trying to instruct us in one sort of way or another of taking crucifixes into the polling place instead of keeping them where they should be, perhaps in our hearts or whatever. And most of the public finds both of these things sort of unattractive for natural reasons, finds itself in the middle somewhere. Now what progressives typically do is they define themselves out here somewhere, floating in some sort of space, as the all-time redistributionist social liberals who put up with anything at all, and who just sort of like government all the time is the only solution to problems, etc. And then they fight against that conception. The idea within the new party is that that strategy is, per se, a losing strategy. It ensures cultural distance from the mass public, and it ensures defensiveness about failed policies. And what we should do instead, ideologically, in terms of message, is to take that axis and rotate it. This is the jiu-jitsu move. I guess it's not jiu-jitsu, but I don't know, hydraulic. And make the fight not between liberals and conservatives as conventionally defined, but between those who believe in imposing some values on the economy and building democratic structures strong enough to enforce and enable them under competitive conditions. You know, not quite a bumper sticker, although in Wisconsin we have these things called Winnebagos, and you have long bumper stickers. Those people, and that's the majority. That's the majority. And then everybody else. And that's basically Michael Eisner and a bunch of rich lawyers who want to protect against any sort of accountability of corporations. So if you focus narrowly on the message, you said, okay, so we want to clean up government, we want to invest in kids, we want to educate forever, we want to complete the welfare state, we want to level up rather than down on trade, we want to close off the low road, help pave the high road. That's what I mean by message of discipline and going on the offense. The economy itself is a values issue, and we should declare it as such. Okay, to get some structure to keep us going, well, progressives, to the extent that they engage in electoral politics, typically do so on a campaign-by-campaign basis. They'll find somebody that they like, you know, a Pat Williams or Carolyn Squires or Saki Fashon or whoever it might be, and they'll work for their election, and maybe they'll get elected, maybe they won't, and then that's the end of things. We're trying to do something different. We're trying to build an organization that actually is an organization. Call it a party, call it something else. We don't really care. Call it Frank if you want. It's an electoral formation with members, one member, one vote, which has a program and runs people for office on that program and tries to win elections and then govern according to that program in ways that keep in touch with those candidates and hold them accountable to it. That's what the new party is. And you would finally then actually do that. You would get into electoral arenas and start running people. We've run about 190 people for office and won now about 130 elections. We're now in 10 states. We've now got 15 chapters. We've got 10,000 members. Half our candidates and people are women. They're not the usual soccer moms driving Volvos that are so, beloved by the national press. They drive more Cavaliers and know more about, friendly meals and stuff like that. But they are getting elected to office. About 35 to 40% of our people are of color, heavily African American, not much Latino representation yet. We've been around now for 4 years, and we have, done these various things. We basically trialed this idea of not wasting votes and not spoiling on a very small scale with almost no money and found it to be wildly successful. That is, in fact, if you run on these sorts of basic values and don't get lost continually in the social issue wars and the wedge issues that Republicans have beaten us up on so much over the years, you can, in fact, win elections. We were trying to learn a lesson for progressives that the right learned a long time ago, which is that if we move together on that which we, in fact, agree on, we can probably be a lot stronger than if we wait around on moving on anything until we agree on everything, which means that we will never move at all. So just to clarify, the right has murderous disputes about when exactly you should end child caning and when exactly you should begin it, how public it should be, and so on. But what they agree in general is that we should de-democratize America, destroy unions, ascend corporate power, make taxes more regressive, and have set about concerting their actions on those sorts of fronts. And we, of course, have murderous disputes about all sorts of things, exactly how many snail darters does it take to fit on the head of a pin, etc. But we agree, basically, that you should have living wages and campaign finance reform and a variety of other things. And the suggestion behind the new party is you have focus on that program and carry that. And the lesson of the new party is you can win in doing that. Now, the way that we've done that has focused, of course, heavily on local elections. Local elections are often nonpartisan elections. And when you get to the partisan level, you run into additional difficulties. Our basic strategy, again, is not to waste votes, and so if we have somebody to run on our own, we run them. If we don't have somebody that we can run on our own who has a serious chance of winning, well, then we look around for the most attractive other candidate we can find, and we endorse them on our values program. In some cases, in just 1 or 2 states, it's possible to do that on our own ballot line, so-called cross-nomination or fusion. And this is a little bit complicated, so let me just take a second to explain it. Forgive the use of the digits. Imagine that you could have a candidate who ran on more than one ballot line, or a slate of candidates, with votes cast on any of the line that was nominating him, counting in his or her total vis-a-vis rivals. So just to keep it simple, let's say you've got Al Gore in the year 2000. He's running on the donkey line, the Democratic line, okay? And then he's running against Steve Forbes. Here's forgive the digits, okay? Where he's running on the elephant, the Republican line. And then you've got Al Gore again, who's endorsed by some new formation called the New Party, or Progressive America, or whatever we finally wind up being called. And Gore gets 35% of the vote, let's say, on the Democratic line. And Forbes gets 49% of the vote on the Republican line. And then Gore gets 16% of the vote on this Progressive Party line. Well, you haven't spoiled, right? Gore still wins. He still beats Forbes. You haven't given it over to the barbarians. You haven't wasted people's votes. But you participated meaningfully in a national election in a way which voted your values without wasting your votes. And the progressive line could say things like, well, we'd actually like national health insurance. And you remember that book that you wrote before becoming vice president? We'd actually like you to enact some of them. You know, that carbon tax idea, we didn't think it was crazy at all. Or, you know, we weren't so crazy about NAFTA. And we, you know, unlike you, we actually like unions. And we think we should double the minimum wage or whatever. So Gore, at that point, gets a very strong signal about what base of his support comes from these nutty people with these sorts of values. And those nutty people with those sorts of values get to participate in a structure which then goes down ballot to the points where it is actually more feasible to run its own people. That's the basic new party idea. You try to combine this fusion stuff at the top of the ballot, to the extent that you need it, with independent races at the bottom of the ballot, including nonpartisan elections. The only problem with the idea is that this fusion stuff is illegal in most of the country. And so thus far we've only been able to move the bottom part of the program, and then only in the most provisional way. But hope here intercedes. We brought a series of cases against state laws banning this practice of fusion, and recently won a major victory in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, 3-0. We argued that preventing parties from colluding or associating on the ballot behind common candidates violates their rights of free association under the First Amendment. 8th Circuit Court of Appeals agreed completely. The Supreme Court recently took the case. We think we'll win. When we win, all of American electoral politics will change. It'll suddenly become possible again to vote your values without wasting your votes. And the basic invitation the new party extends to not just progressive Democrats, but anybody who shares these values is, why don't we all get together? Why don't we get together on an electoral line which is big enough that the center can see us? Our view is not to chip away at this end of the Democratic Party. Our goal is to get big enough so that these people see that someone is actually speaking for them, not speaking down to them, not administering them, but actually speaking with their values. Get people recruited out of unions to run for office. Vote for the nurse, not the lawyer. Vote for the machinist, not the lawyer. The teamster, not the lawyer. Run thousands of you know, have training academies in which you have slate trainings of people to run for all these local offices. It'd be a lot more fun if they ran together. You could provide them with better materials. If you run for school board alone, you're basically inviting yourself to a series of unhappy meetings in which people call you up all night about their cruddy kids. If you vote, well, it's just sort of a joke, and clearly a very successful one. But if you ran as a slate of people, you could actually do something about local education. If you ran slates of people for city council, you could do stuff about sprawl and land use and local economic development, et cetera. And that would be a farm team for people running to higher levels of office. And then when you have the capacity to run at higher levels, you run on your own. Where you don't, you cross doors. For labor in particular, we think this would solve a problem which is long-standing, going back at least to the New Deal and with real, I think, force since the early 1970s. Just there are a lot of people who actually have some responsibility in this life for representing other people. For example, unions, the only major non-business dominated organization in American life. And they can't afford to say goodbye to the Democratic Party or just walk away from it easily. Because if they just say goodbye to it, well, that leaves the Republicans. But what they could do is they could develop a more critical relation to the Democratic Party by forming their own sorts of electoral coalitions and then cross-endorsing Democrats where they agreed with them and running people independently where they could, in fact, run and win. And the thought in the new party is that progressives should think seriously about doing that, at least. Because relations between us and the Democratic Party at this point have become sort of like an abusive relationship. They take our money, they take our votes, they take our energies, they take, you know, not too many of our ideas, and then they go south on us. And the way to end abuse in a relationship, whether you want to end the relationship or not, is to develop the ability to leave it. Thanks.
And I told Joel he could take some of my time. I didn't really think he'd take me that seriously. First, let me say that it's a pleasure to share this panel with these three individuals tonight. Pat and Carolyn are longtime friends and political allies of mine and of our union. Pat and Carolyn have probably done more for working people and for unions than any other elected official that I can think of. And I just met Joel tonight, but I like him. Let me also take issue with what Eric said, that the Missoula New Party exists to be a challenge to the Democrats. We have too much work to do to spend time trying to figure out how to challenge the Democrats. I know the Democrats in Montana pretty well, and I think that they're working pretty hard trying to figure out how to do politics better too. And maybe if we spent less time figuring out whether we were challenging each other, we'd do politics more effectively. I'm delighted to see all of you here, and would join Eric in inviting you to make this a discussion after the next couple of panelists, because I really think the issue tonight is about how to do politics more effectively. It's not about the Missoula New Party versus the Democrats. Some people say about the Missoula New Party, well, you're not really a party because you don't have ballot status. Well, that's true, and Joel has talked a little bit about our views on that. Some people accuse us of being a PAC, as if somehow we'll be offended. We don't spend much time at the Missoula New Party, I can tell you, figuring out whether we're calling ourselves the right thing. We spend time figuring out how to do politics more effectively. When I think about the discussion about doing politics more effectively, I think first about issues. And I think about issues that reflect my values, and I consider myself a progressive. I'm glad Joel did the definition part of the speech. I know many of you in this room consider yourselves progressives, whether you feel more like a Democrat in Missoula or more like a New Party person. And the progressive issues, or the issues I think important to progressives in Missoula, include, at the risk of repeating what you all know in your hearts and souls, things like affordable housing. We don't have enough affordable housing in Missoula. That's an issue important to me as a progressive who cares about our community. The issues include open space. How do we plan for preservation of open space, but also have more affordable housing? And how can we bring those two issues, important to us as progressives, together so that they complement each other? The issues include the kind of quality of education we provide our children in this community, and electing people to a school board that will reflect the kind of quality of education that, as progressives, we think is important in our Missoula schools. The issues include, and this is one near to my heart, good jobs and fair wages, and a living wage, the new buzzword, beyond a minimum wage, a living wage, a livable wage, and a living wage for all Missoula working people. And the issues, I think, for progressives, and therefore for the Progressive Party, the Missoula New Party, respect for diversity and the diverse populations that coexist in our community, and making sure all people are treated fairly and without discrimination. And the Missoula New Party spends its time not trying to be a challenge to the Democrats, but trying to figure out how to do effective politics that address those kinds of issues which reflect our values as progressives. I was first attracted to the New Party for a couple of reasons. One is this concept of fusion, and Joel has talked about it well tonight. I can tell you that as a union organizer in today's America, winning feels like a really elusive thing. We're not winning that much. And I feel that way about politics. I feel like the people that think like me, progressives, haven't been winning that much. So one of the things that's important to me when I think about politics is figuring out how to win more often. I like winning better. Winning is more fun. Winning is better. And so fusion struck me as a way that we might win more often, or increase our capacity to be successful in politics. The opportunity to blend votes and propel the right candidate, the progressive candidate, forward seemed like a good new option to try as we try to figure out how to do politics better. And just frankly, just like I don't think anybody has the manual on how to build unions in America today, I'm not sure anybody has the manual on how to do politics better in America today. Joel is one of the brightest national minds, based on all the left literature I read, trying to write that manual. But I'm not sure anybody has the manual. There's no guidebook in how to build a new party, any more than there's how to build a new union in today's America. So as we figure it out, fusion seems like a good thing. And it's part of why I was originally attracted to the New Party. The other thing that attracted me to the New Party that is relevant to my piece here about the Missoula New Party is the emphasis this party and these folks have placed on doing politics locally. Because it seems to me that if we agree, and I think Joel's right, Carolyn Stories would be the best example of where we are not doing politics effectively. If we agree that we need to do politics better, then we should start at the local level and try to figure that out. And the New Party appealed to me in its commitment to looking at local races, school board races, city council races, county commission races, places where folks can intersect with politics in a hopefully more meaningful way and maybe increase our ability to be effective. Let me briefly share with you how our union came to have a relationship with the Missoula New Party, which is largely the reason that I'm involved as a leader of the New Party. The Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union and our affiliate United Healthcare Workers Union represents arguably the poorest working people in our community. Nursing home workers, restaurant workers, casino workers. When I first came to a leadership position in this union 10 years ago, I instinctively thought that the right thing to do would be to build a political program. Aren't unions supposed to have political programs? We in fact have political action committees and the opportunity to give money to politics. And interestingly, I found a great deal of resistance among our membership, poor working people, to the notion of building a political program within our union. And yet every day our members said to me things that I thought were about politics. Our nursing home members said, we don't have enough staff in Missoula nursing homes to provide quality care. Well, I know that staffing levels are set by elected officials. Looks like a political issue to me. Our members said to me, and they still say, that they deserve the right to a fair wage, even if they work for tips, and that they feel under assault by routine proposals for a sub-minimum wage for tipped employees. They don't think that's fair. I know that minimum wage levels are set by elected officials. Look like a political issue to me. People working in casinos, and when I first got to my job, casinos were just coming into our community and starting to go crazy. Talked to us about the quality of work life they were experiencing, some of the conditions they were working under in Missoula casinos. And they talked about the fact that their level of compensation was not commensurate with the level of profitability that that industry has been experiencing. Well, I know that gaming is regulated by elected officials. I know that gaming operates in our state at the blessing of elected officials. So it looked like a political issue to me. And yet our members didn't want us to be involved in politics. And as I talked to them and as I surveyed them to figure out, where was I going wrong? Because a good leader tries to figure out where the troops are and then tries to move forward together instead of being way out front. And we surveyed our members and found out that more than 50% of our membership here in Missoula in those years were not participating in politics. Most of them were not even registered to vote or were not voting. And when we surveyed further to find out why, we found out a couple of things, or they told us a couple of things. The members said first, they don't always feel like they know who to vote for. I thought that was interesting. When you think about what happens through the media right before an election time, there's a lot of information out there. But our members were saying they don't trust that information. They don't trust the sources of information enough to feel confident about the choices ahead of them when they go to vote. So they don't vote. And the other really important thing they said to us, that they didn't feel their vote made a difference. They didn't feel it really mattered if they got involved in politics. Because either the person they supported, the candidate they supported, wasn't electable, or even if elected, that person may not make decisions much different from those their opponent might have made if elected, and may not make decisions that seem to change the quality of life that we experience as poor working people. So as we have built in the last 10 years a different kind of political program in our union, one of the things that we've stopped doing is talking about party affiliation. We take a look at candidates, we ask them about our issues, we ask them if they're willing to make a commitment to our organization and build a long-term organizational relationship with us, to continue to work with us on the issues important to us. Brief story about how we came to intersect with the Missoula New Party as we were developing that political program. There was, some years ago, a contested Democratic primary for city council. There were 4 Democrats running for city council in a Missoula City ward. The Missoula New Party endorsed one of the candidates. Another one of the candidates happened to be the lobbyist for the Montana Restaurant Association in his professional life. As that lobbyist for that restaurant association, he was routinely proposing a sub-minimum wage for tipped employees at the Montana State Legislature. Our members had met and talked with this man many times. As the restaurant union, our members didn't like this guy. They don't like the idea of a sub-minimum wage for tipped employees. So our members, that membership, 50% of whom was not registered to vote and not participating in politics, decided to get involved in politics around that primary election. More of our members registered to vote that campaign season than at any time before or since. More of our members, working people here in Missoula, participated in politics that election cycle by going door to door, talking to their neighbors, distributing literature. And ultimately, we endorsed the new party candidate. Ultimately, the new party candidate won. Today, that person is president of the Missoula City Council and recently drafted language for a living wage ordinance here in Missoula, another issue that's really important to the members of our union. That experience for our members was about doing politics more effectively and doing politics differently. We had a candidate who was accountable to our issues and our needs, who built a long-term relationship with us, and who is still there to work with us on issues to come. The Missoula New Party has many things to be proud of, and as Eric alluded, many things are often attributed to the Missoula New Party that in fact we didn't do. Some of them I think we should take credit for. Others we're not really even sure what the story's all about. But I think that may be a measure of the role we've come to play in Missoula politics. I don't know if that's all bad. There are about 200 dues-paying members of the Missoula New Party right now. The Missoula New Party is proud to have elected a number of fine people to the Missoula City Council, who, along with other fine city council people, work very hard to make good policy for our city. The Missoula New Party took a leadership role in bridging the gap in those discussions about open space and affordable housing. I believe that's a discussion that needs to continue. We made a significant contribution to the successful open space bond issue, a campaign that many of us predicted could never win, and it did win. The Missoula New Party worked on the family definition ordinance that City Council grappled with, because we believe there should be no discrimination when it comes to affordable housing. And that ordinance would have discriminated against university students and other low-income people. The Missoula New Party is going to go on to work on the living wage ordinance. We're going to go on to elect fine people to the Missoula City Council. And most importantly, we're going to go on to continue to have these discussions with people like you about how to do politics more effectively. And so I'm glad you're here, and after Pat and Carolyn speak, I hope you'll jump in with your comments and your questions, because we're all here to learn too. Thanks.
Like the others, I'm delighted to be here with three friends and see some of you that I haven't seen since I've been home. I'm a Democrat who doesn't like being on the defense, but I've found for the past 20 years that I've spent a lot of time defending the party that needs the least defense because of its superior record in American politics over more than half a century, and yet I find myself defending it a lot, and tonight, to Democrats. It's an interesting irony for me. As near as I know, I've always been a Democrat without a prefix. I'm not a progressive Democrat or a liberal Democrat or a Southern Democrat or a conservative Democrat or a Western Democrat or a new Democrat. I've just been a Democrat because it's easier and I know what it means. And it's less destructive to the kinds of things that you and I share in common and try to get at the end of the day here in Missoula or Helena or Washington, D.C. It's less destructive to keep the Democrats together under one tent. You're more likely to get what you want that way. So I have, with pride, just always kind of been a Democrat, but I want to say of all the third party, if the new party is a third party, of all the third party movements that I've heard of and been concerned about over my adult lifetime, the new party has, I think, the best of ideas with this notion of fusion. I'm very interested in it, and I think it is a new and potentially revolutionary element in tomorrow's American politics. Does the Democratic Party serve the same old constituency is one of the titles that we're to address tonight. And of course the answer to that's no. The Democratic Party doesn't serve the same old constituencies. I mean, for example, it doesn't serve Southerners very well anymore. It doesn't. They've left. Got too progressive for them. Some others left on the left because it wasn't progressive enough. So no, it doesn't serve the same old constituencies because it's a vibrant, living, growing, throbbing, caring party with a huge umbrella that casts an enormous shadow across this country for 60 plus years. Although I like the fusion notion, and I think it is revolutionary and will be effective, I'm concerned about the third party notion because I find third parties to be short-term destructive. The problem with third parties is they give birth to fourth parties and fifth parties and sixth parties, and then you're Brazil. Your winners get 15% of the vote because you have 12 parties on the ballot. And in America, you're supposed to have a majority agree to who leads us. That means two parties. And somebody gets 51% of the vote, or at least close enough to properly represent the majority of citizens in that district, that state, that city, that country. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth parties are undeniably destructive to that. It was 1968. There was a terrible, mistaken, tragic, and in many ways illegal war progressing in Asia called Vietnam. There was in the middle of that terrible conflagration a presidential race between a fellow named Hubert Humphrey and a guy who at that time was the comeback kid, Richard Nixon. And progressive Democrats abandoned their party. And what was the result? Richard Nixon. An extended Vietnam. A flattening of Cambodia that still lingers in the hearts and minds and topography of that country. Watergate. Corruption. The denigration of American trust in government because progressives left Hubert Humphrey for Richard Nixon. Did they vote for him? No, they didn't vote. And Humphrey just missed it by that much. It was destructive. Changed history for the worst. Was there a third party that did it? No, it was just progressives that couldn't see that Vietnam was going to end more quickly with Humphrey than it was with anyone else. And so to make a case, they cleverly and outrageously wouldn't vote in the presidential primary. And the result was Richard Nixon. And America turned a corner and has never come back. It happens here at home. 8 years ago, John Melcher, who wasn't perfect enough for some days not for me either, because I served with him, was abandoned by the progressives in the Democratic Party, and you got Conrad Burns. Now, how do you like it? Was that short-term destruction? Did you spit in the wind and get your face wet or not? And now you've got Rick Hill on top of it. You've got Rick because you had Conrad. And you had Conrad because you abandoned the best hope you had, whether it was perfect or not, John Melcher. Third parties can be destructive. Abandoning the major party can be destructive. That is not, I know, because of the fusion element, what the new party does. But they have a way of turning into a third party. And in my judgment, there's short-term destruction in that. Is the Democratic Party worth having? Well, let me go through a quick litany, and I'll make it quick because I don't want to bore you, but it's good to remind ourselves as progressives about the eggs laid by this great national party, which is the oldest political organization on earth. The United Nations, Social Security, Head Start in '66, Head Start. In '96, AmeriCorps. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, without which catastrophes, natural disasters would have overtaken not just California, but America by now. That little organization is a Democratic egg hatched by Democrats 20 years ago. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the National Institute of Health, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. That's one you may not have heard of. They're the people that found Legionnaire's disease. They're the people that go around the world and fight the Ebola virus so it won't come here to Missoula. They're the people that in 2 months found the hantavirus in the desert in the Southwest. Democrats had to fight like hell to create that agency and have to fight every term of Congress to keep it. Don't abandon a party that does that for you. Stay with them. If you're going to work outside of it, work inside of it too. The space program, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the list goes on. We have reasons to be proud of a party that I think's great. I think George Wallace had it wrong when he said, you know, there's not a dime's worth of difference between the parties. That's not what I found when I represented you for 18 years in the Congress of the United States. I found enormous difference between these two parties. Now, is the Democratic Party perfect? Absolutely not. The National Democrats are too reluctant. Due to their constituencies now, they are too reluctant to face some things. Let me list them for you. National Democrats don't want to face military waste and the enormous cost to the democracy in both dollars and democracy of the military Pentagon buildup. Democrats don't want to face it the way we ought to. Democrats are not properly facing the inequities that are inherent in today's free market so-called economy. They don't want to restrain corporations the way they once did and should again. Democrats don't want to move dramatically and boldly to meet the needs of America's changing workforce the way they once did under Roosevelt, Truman, and Kennedy, and ought to do again. Democrats don't properly move to create jobs as we should. And finally, on my short list about what my party does not well enough, we don't accept and address the problems inherent in our inner cities and our rural poor. And by the way, America will either face those problems soon, or we will live in two Americas for the rest of our lives, one poor and illiterate, and the others paying for them, and watching the denigration of their fellow citizens continue downhill. Now finally, let me say this, and I say it advisedly and carefully because a lot of my pals here belong, as perhaps you should, working within both the new party and the Democratic Party. But I want to make an important point about third parties. Third parties are fun. It's fun to raise hell about the majority party. It's fun to raise hell about incumbents. It's a jolly good time. Problem is you end up with Richard Nixon if you carry it too far. Or you end up with what the Irish writer James Joyce once wrote about his beloved country, which angered him because it turned on its own heroes and leaders too often and did it out of fun. James Joyce wrote these words about Ireland. This lovely land that always sent its writers and artists to banishment, and in the spirit of good old Irish fun, betrayed its leaders one by one. Let's not do that as progressives, as liberals, as big D Democrats. Thank you.
Wow. It's really nice to follow Pat Williams. Citizen Pat Williams, and that's the best part of it, Citizen Pat Williams. Anyhow, thank you very much for inviting me to the panel. It's nice to be with Seki and to meet the gentleman that is the leader of, quote, the new party. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a Democrat. There's a couple of things in my life that you don't mess with. One of them is my party. One of them is my union. I work extremely hard in both of those arenas to serve my friends and to serve the general public. And I believe that I've done that to the best of my ability, and every day I strive to do it in any way that I can. I believe that I am a progressive. I believe that I operate within the Democratic Party. I believe that I follow and subscribe to the planks that are in that Democratic Party, and I'm proud to champion those causes. I find it somewhat upsetting and disconcerting to me when someone wants to attack that precious party that I want to participate in and to find fault with it. It does have problems, but please, I ask not to work outside of the structure. We have plenty of room within our party for everyone. I've seen many of you at the functions that I've participated in. You've contributed to my campaigns. You've walked the streets for me. I look at my friend Bill Chalupka up there, and I remember the time that we had, from Missoula County, one of the strongest sets of planks put into the Montana State Democratic Party, and we've not had it since. That's because many of us have found another path to go and have not come together and united as one under the Democratic umbrella. Some accuse us of it being too large in the issues of gays and lesbians, in the issues of too much concern about the environment, too much money for education. All of these things that I know that each and one of you hold dear to yourselves in this room. We don't consider those outlandish. We consider them common to all of us and a natural goal. But unless we unite one more time together and make an effort to do this, I fear. One of the things that's happened to us is reapportionment. It's restructured the legislature. It's caused some real problems. And until reapportionment takes over again, we're not likely to have a majority in the Montana House of Representatives or the state Senate. That's probably, I think, 4 to 5 more years down the line. But we as Democrats need to participate in that process and help with the structuring. We kind of took a lackadaisical approach to it last time, and look at what happened, my friends. We don't have districts the same structured as they were. The other issue here is people are moving. Montanans are mobile. They're moving from the east to the west. The northwestern section of your state is becoming much more populated. Lines are being drawn differently. The northwest corner up there, let me tell you folks, it's unreal what's coming out of there as far as politics is concerned. And I've just come from that lovely place today, and I can tell you it's really rather different. So we need to unite together and join and put a force and move in that area. I also ran in the last legislative session, as everybody knows, or else I wouldn't be in Helena. But I ran against a Republican, a natural law party, a libertarian, and myself. 4 parties. 4 parties. Now, what do you think the people thought when they went to the ballot? In the primary, they saw the Democrat and they saw the Republican. The Republican had a primary, so there were now 3 names on the ballot. My name was there. None of us knew anything about the Natural Law Party, so what was my plan? What was my plan of attack in this effort to regain my seat as far as going back to Helena? It was to read a brochure and to try to figure out what the plan was. I knew what the Libertarian basically was about because I'd visited with Mr. Fellows several times, and I knew pretty much what happened. It's just like Pat said when you talk about third parties. Normally I get about 60 to 62% of the vote. I received 55 total. The Republican got 39, the Libertarian got 2, and the Natural Party got 4. There was a split there, my friends, that you need to put into perspective and understand that if they would have pursued a little further along the line, may not have been there, or it could have been divided a lot differently. And just as he said, the minority would have ruled in that particular district. So please take that into consideration. Another area of concern that my friends have amongst my legislative friends is the issue of the pledge. The pledge that the new party asks the folks to sign. A pledge to uphold their goals, whatever they ask you to do. We, in our group in the Democratic side, felt very affronted when Rob Nadelson asked us to do that. We don't sign a pledge. We work towards the goals of our friends and our persons and our constituents within our district. Signing a pledge is not something that I feel very comfortable about. Also, let me tell you, and this I'll try to say it softly, but many a time when I went to a door in my district, they said to me, "Are you one of those new party Democrats?" I said, "I'm a Democrat, not a new party Democrat." In my race, it was very important that the separation be held between the new party Democrat and the Democrat. That's not to disregard any of my friends that are in this room. They've been supportive. They've done fine things. But I think that they should also remember that I am the Democrat. Thank you.
I'm going to ask anyone that wants to ask any questions to move to the microphones. I have a couple of questions I'll ask while you line up. Please don't be shy. First of all, Seki, would you respond to what Carolyn was mentioning about the pledge?
The contract?
The contract. Or maybe explain what it is first.
Sure. Carolyn's referring to an agreement that the Missoula New Party, as it has formed and developed and tried to figure out what it means to be a party, or to participate in politics effectively. It's an agreement that the New Party developed between candidates the party would choose to endorse and the party. The purpose is to address some of the feelings that New Party folks have had about the need to improve the long-term relationship between elected officials that we choose to support once they're elected and the members of the party. To make sure that candidates, once elected, remember the platform or principles or values or issues that cause that party to endorse them. Now, I can share with you that the New Party in Missoula is not wed to that particular strategy. And in fact, it's had tremendous feedback, not only from Democrats, but from candidates that we have endorsed and others, that that's not a useful mechanism. I suspect within the Missoula New Party, and there are people here that may want to speak to this from the floor mic later, there's diverse opinion about the usefulness of that agreement. I think it speaks to my point about not having a manual on how to do politics better and not having a manual on how to do a new party, but some instinctive sense that we want a different kind of relationship with candidates once elected. And frankly, the kind of relationship the Missoula New Party seeks with candidates is the kind of relationship that the constituents of Pat Williams and Carolyn Squires have enjoyed in the time that they've been elected leaders. And if all elected officials were like Carolyn and Pat, we probably never would have thought about using a contract. So.
I have a question for Joel. Joel, a couple of times you mentioned as one of your 5 messages, closing the low road and paving the high road. I'm not sure I understand what that is. The other 4 were pretty self-explanatory.
Okay. You've got falling wages for much of the population in America, and have for 20 years, and you have rising inequality. And you do because most firms in the U.S. have chosen to respond to increased competition. Competition itself in part occasioned by internationalization, in part by technological change, in part by more open labor markets, by pursuing what you might call low-road strategies of competition, which focus primarily on price of products, starting with the price of fixed labor. There's an alternative strategy, and if you pursue that strategy, if you outsource labor and then you casualize labor and you ship the stuff overseas and you just go for lower and lower prices and deregulation, et cetera, it has the consequences that you see in our labor market. Now, there is a high road, an alternative high road, which is available, in which you would choose to compete less on the basis of price than quality. You would try to have higher value added by workers, and that would require better trained workers, better infrastructure, better training institutions out there to provide those workers, better communication among firms, modernization of firms, blah, 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 blah. But it can be done. The problem is no individual firm has an incentive to do it, because no individual firm has the power to wave a magic wand and produce a well-educated workforce, or good transport or other infrastructure, or other firms moving with it. Those are decisions we've got to make as a society. As a society, we basically said, we are not going to close off the low road. We are going to make it very easy to make a lot of money in America, treating people like roadkill and the earth like a sewer. And we're going to make it quite hard to make money treating your workers responsibly, because we're not going to ever shield you from competition from people doing it first. Other countries have made that choice. I think not making that choice, not showing leadership in that choice, is for me actually the biggest failure of the Democratic Party in the 1970s and the 1980s. That the business domination of the Democratic Party led it not to be willing to engage what was about to happen to at least one part of its core constituency, to non-college educated working class folks who've gotten just hammered in the last 20 years.
So, I'm sorry, I'm still not quite... So specifically, close the low road. How does one do that? How do we do that?
You know, you raise the minimum wage, you pass a living wage law, you don't use tax dollars to subsidize firms paying workers less than an amount which will lead them to contribute meaningfully to the tax base of your community, or to firms that are polluting, or whatever, okay? You make certain sorts of dirty, low-wage, union-busting, et cetera, forms of competition less available to firms. Helping to pave the high road means Get your educational and training systems in place. Have effective school-to-work programs. Have some sort of way of, in fact, connecting community colleges to firms and to PICs and to get, intelligent labor market administration where people go into the labor market, understand what's expected of them, what skill standards are, how they can have careers, add work, and make progress, and to work with firms to modernize them, things like that.
Okay, thank you. Sir?
I'll try to be brief. I just want to clarify one thing. Congressman Williams, I got the impression that you were intimating that the new party was a spoiler party. And I would like to use the word ancillary. That's what we are. We're an ancillary party. We're the same kind of party that they had in North Dakota. It was called the Farm Labor. It was closely allied with the Democratic Party. And in Minnesota, it's still called the Farm Labor Democrats, and it's the party that Hubert Humphrey belonged to. We are not spoilers, we're ancillary. And there's another thing. One word we use, it's called solidarity. And that is one of the things that is weakening us because we don't know what solidarity means.
Well, okay. Sir?
Just like to say, it's kind of make it a hard decision to decide whether you want a big party that may reflect some of our values but not all of them, or a littler party that might not win but will reflect all of our values. And so it's a tough decision if you want to really go for what you believe in, or maybe settle for something less but has a better chance, you know what I mean? So it's hard to say.
Depends how important you think winning is. Getting some of what you want.
Yeah.
If it's not that important to you to win, then you can stay in a real small party and you sleep better, but you never get your legislation passed.
Yeah, although that's, if I could just clarify, that is not the alternative that we're offering it.
Yeah, that's not the
Right.
alternative.
I mean, and we're not, the new party is not going to satisfy all of your wants either. It's not going to reflect all of your values, whatever they are. It's going to reflect a certain set of core values that we think are widely shared. And we refuse winning arguments through dissuasive definition that we're the party that wants to lose. You're the party that wants to win and wins at a higher rate than the Democratic Party. We win 70% of our elections. You've won far fewer in recent years.
Brian?
Well, maybe we ought to start having people sign contracts. That way we'd only have 190 candidates every time. Then we'd probably increase our winning ratio, wouldn't we?
It's possible.
But when you say you all come, you want to be Democrats, you all come, you're going to get some losers along the way over a 200-year period.
Yeah, I'm just...
Brian?
But,
Oh, I'm sorry.
just resisting the idea that to do anything outside the Democratic Party is to choose ideological sectarianism and losing all the time. What we're trying to do is something different than that. We're not claiming to be the oldest political institution on the earth. We're a new party. We are not in any way gainsaying the enormous accomplishment of Franklin Roosevelt, Jack Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, and a variety of Thomas Jefferson, a variety of other people. We're simply saying that it's possible to think of a way of building something that's both inside and outside the Democrats, that has some organizational structure, that runs people for office, that runs them on values, that, coheres and that wins elections. And that building such a thing might not be such a bad thing in America right now. That's all we're saying. And who could object to that?
Brian?
I just want to say I'm delighted about this evening. I think we should have more conversations like this because I've been sitting on the fence for a long time with my friends in the new party pushing me to join, and my friends in the Democratic Party bring up many of the arguments that you brought up tonight. But there were several things that came up that I want to comment and ask questions on. Pat, you mentioned that if there's more than two parties, we have the problem with only 15% of the electorate or the population leading, and currently that's what we have right now because approximately 30% of the population voted, and we've only got half of that in power, so I don't see the difference, quite frankly. The other thing is, you also mentioned that the reason that we have Rick Hill is because of Conrad Burns. When I had many, many political discussions with my friends in both parties around the election, that was not the feeling that most people had. Most people felt that it was insiders the Democratic Party did not run a very good race for his opposition. The other thing is, I'm quite frankly tired of having to vote, and I'm not talking about every single Democrat, because there are some fine Democrats, but quite frankly, I'm tired of having to be in a situation where I have to vote for the lesser of the two evils, and for voting for a candidate that only stands for 10% of my issues. Because Carolyn, you mentioned that one of the reasons that maybe the Democratic Party is not winning is because they're too strong on the environment. Quite frankly, I think the Democrats have been pitiful for the most part on the environment. We started this legislative session in Helena with our Representative Cocciarella saying that the first thing that we have to do is consider jobs and be less virulent on the environment. And I don't see the two as opposing situations, and I think that's half the time. That's why we're in part of the problem. I just think also you mentioned that we need to change from within the Democratic Party, and I've had discussions with Democrats and New Party people on these issues. And the problem that I've found with the Democratic Party is there's not a lot of room for new people, that a lot of it is old money and the same kind of power structures that we're seeing within the Republican Party. I mean, there's some horrible corruption within our own Democratic Party here. And I think that people are just tired of this. And I quite frankly, as a progressive, and I don't really consider myself as standing for any political party, but I am a progressive. I really believe in the issues that Joel talked about. And except for a few exceptions, I'm lost as to where to vote when the election comes, because there's just hardly anybody else there standing up for those values.
I just want to respond to a related thing that Pat brought up, which is this business about third parties, we get fourth parties, we get fifth parties, sixth parties, and pretty soon you're in Brazil or Israel or somewhere, right? And what I'd like to say is simply that you're wrong. And the evidence, no. I think you're wrong, just empirically. In the U.S., since the consolidation of the modern two-party system in, what do you want to date, 1840, 1850 roughly, okay? You've had more than 1,000 third parties of one sort or another form. None has ever polled more than 12% of the vote in a national election. None has ever done that in consecutive elections, okay? So I don't think there's a major danger of third partydom. In New York today, and when you had fusion in the 19th century, the characteristic structure was you had the two dominant parties, and then you had maybe one or two satellites or ancillaries or whatever you were calling them. You never had a huge number of parties. Of course, you always had, the natural law types of the period, but you never had any serious population of parties beyond 4 or so. And if you think that applies in the 19th century and not to 20th century, then look to the one case where you do have fusion practice, which is New York. And in New York, you've never had more than 4 parties. So the image of turning, Wisconsin into Weimar and Montana into, Italy or something, I think is simply misplaced empirically in the U.S. One other very small thing. Yeah, I didn't quite follow your thing about Richard Nixon, as I understood, although that didn't have to do anything with the third party. A bunch of Democrats held back, and then Richard Nixon begat Watergate, and Watergate begat lack of trust in government, and that begat everything else that follows. And that seemed, I was missing a few steps there, quite a few steps. There was no left challenge to Richard Nixon that accounted for Humphrey's decline in the polls. There was a third party, but it was led by the right, and it took both from Humphrey's base and from Nixon, namely Wallace's effort at the time. And the big thing that we're talking about here, I think, is the economic decline. But if you want to talk about blaming things, notice that Franklin Roosevelt would not have won the election in New York in 1940 or 44 had it not been for the support of a third party. Jack Kennedy would not have won New York but for the support of a third party. And so you can point to at least as many constructive instances of actually building democratic power as I think you can point to destructive one. Indeed, our experience in the new party is that where we have been most active, the relationship has been rather like the relationship between the Greens and the Social Democratic Party. That is, it has strengthened them. It's strengthened the base of progressive forces in two ways. One is it's mobilized people who could not be mobilized by the more mainstream party, but along common programs. And then it has also provided them with a coalition partner.
Well, let me just say that I didn't offer empirical evidence with regard to third, fourth, fifth, sixth parties in America creating minority presidents or minority governments, because you're right, there is no empirical evidence. I'm simply speaking to the growing mood in America to have additional parties. One of the most successful in history was Perot's, a very recent phenomenon. I think there is this growing trend in America for people to want to leave the two major parties and form parties within their own special interest. And I just say that we ought to consider what has happened in other nations that have gone to that, which would be destructive in a society that wants 51% of the people to be those who elect their representatives, those who would represent them. With regard to Briney's notion that you like because it's fun, and that is you're tired of voting for the lesser of two evils, that is a 225-year-old American complaint that goes by the title of cop-out. When Jack Kennedy and Richard Nixon ran for president, there probably were not two more qualified, one can dispute morality or all the rest of it, but two more qualified people to be president in your lifetimes, maybe no matter how long any of us live. And yet, what was the complaint about Richard Nixon and Jack Kennedy? Oh, neither one of them were qualified. It was the lesser of two evils. One was some rich kid that didn't know his way around the block. The other guy was probably a crook. We didn't like either one of them. We wish we'd have had a better choice. That happens in every election I've ever been involved in. We Americans are a notoriously dissatisfied lot with our candidates. And you will be notoriously dissatisfied with new party incumbents, because that's how Americans are. That's how Montanans are. And it's kind of good for the system in a way, but it is a bit of a cop-out.
Okay, we have some more questions. We're going to go over here. But just a minute, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Jeff asked me to go back and forth because he's filming, and that's the way he wanted to do it. So. Oh, is it?
I don't. Who is it?
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. I don't know. I don't really think there's a discussion going on here, because in a discussion, usually you're talking about the same thing. And so, I mean, generally speaking, I suppose we are, but, and I don't really mean to pick on Congressman Williams, Citizen Williams, but I just want to push this last question by Joel Rogers just a bit further, because in your presentation, on the one hand, you wanted to sort of, several times you said that, you know, the fusion idea is a good idea. It's not exactly match up to the kind of threats that you have when you raise two bugbears, right? Evil, Nixon, right? And anarchy, which I guess is Brazil in this case. And so, but clearly, though, you don't get those exact outcomes. And there actually is an empirical issue here, and I think that was exactly what the last few comments were, that there are empirical cases of where the fusion alternative in New York, we can historically say that it doesn't result in this sort of, you know, breakdown of the electoral process. It doesn't seem to be anti-American in any way, unless you want to sort of say New York is anti-American, you know, which I certainly don't. So I just would really rather you take this fusion idea seriously and then tell us why, given the fusion idea, we should still back the Democratic Party. Because that's the issue, right? That's the conversation. The conversation is not third parties in general versus sticking with the Democratic Party. And then what should people who are dissatisfied by, I don't know, natural you know, lot or preference with their incumbents. You know, the question is, what do you do with this idea of the fusion party, the idea of the fusion party versus sticking to the Democratic Party? And with that, I don't see the Nixon road and I don't see the Brazil road as really following quite clearly. So tell me why I should stay in the Democratic Party rather than joining a party that endorses this fusion idea, which seems to allow me to support a lot of Democratic candidates while at the same time saying something public about what I believe in, which I don't think is quite represented by the existing two parties.
Well, I guess we're not talking about the same thing, and I think you're right about that, because I addressed the question that Eric offered as the reason for being here, which is, does the Democratic Party represent the same old constituency? What most of you wanted to talk about and have me talk about is the fusion idea. And I could sense that as we started going here, so I said to you at the outset, I rather like this fusion idea. I sort of endorse it. I think it's probably revolutionary, and if it begins to take on power in America, if it begins to become, precedential, not presidential, but precedential in its offerings to people, I think it probably is revolutionary, and I'm not necessarily opposed to it. But that wasn't what I was asked to come and talk about, so I talked about what I was asked to come and talk about, which was the title and the question that Eric gave us when we started, which is, does the Democratic Party represent the same old constituency? And then as sort of a subtitle, are we supportive of third parties? And so, it's no wonder you didn't hear me address what you want me to talk about, because it's not what Eric asked me to come here and talk about. If you want to know if I'm kind of endorse the fusion notion, yeah, I really kind of do. I think it's not a bad idea. I don't want it to lead to a third party. I don't want that to happen. Pardon?
That is the idea.
Yeah, right, and I don't want it to do that. Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah, well,
at this
see,
point in time,
exactly.
fusion isn't possible in most places, so that's a not minor issue.
Right, but
Rich, do you have a
the
question?
brother is correct, though, that it does not make sense to say you endorse the fusion idea, or at least I wouldn't know what the content of the idea was, if it was not the idea that you'd have a qualified party with a ballot line, and when it could run its own people and win, where it's committed to not spoiling, right? It would do so, and where it couldn't, then it would fuse with the most progressive person it could find. That is the idea.
Yeah.
So if you go very far down ballot, you could have a formation, you wouldn't need to call it a party. I mean, most of our things are just called Progressive X, whatever X happens to be, Progressive Milwaukee, Progressive Dane County, et cetera. You could have these sort of electoral coalitions that would have membership and have values and programs that would look like a party, act like a party, be a party, in fact, but you wouldn't need to call it party. So then we could maybe avoid discussion there. But at the partisan level, it would be a party. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to, it wouldn't have the power to nominate, which is what fusion is about, joint nomination.
Butch?
I'm reminded tonight of the joke where someone says third party, heck, I'd settle for two. Things, of course, aren't that bad. I don't mean to be insulting, but particularly on domestic policy, there are clear differences between Democrats and Republicans. As a student of war and peace, I've seen very little difference over 20 years in matters of foreign policy and the military, and I think it's interesting to note that the '68 election presented Richard Nixon versus the party of Johnson and Kennedy, who got us into Vietnam in the first place, and the same party that defeated the true peace candidate, Gene McCarthy. And so I think '68 elections is an argument for alternatives as well as for being careful about being a spoiler. So anyhow, I would like it if those panelists that cared to would comment on differences or even hopes between Democratic, Republican, new party on these matters of military issues, foreign policy.
Joel?
Well, I think there are important differences between the Democratic and Republican parties on all manner of domestic and foreign policy issues. In foreign policy, it's certainly much less stated. Indeed, it's not clear what Democratic foreign policy consists in now or what Republican foreign policy consists in. And there's this big continuing post-Cold War consensus of some sort that I guess they're both executing. The new party has not worked out a foreign policy. And that for the particular reason that we would like our programmatic statements to be in some way, and this also departs in substantial measure from democratic practice, related to reality and what we would actually do. That is, we like to have a program that people then do something about. And since we have no control over the military budget or other things or international trade, we have worked out detailed positions on that. Within the party, though, I can tell you that the scope of discussion is to, in terms of the military budget, it's quite at odds with both the military proposals of Clinton and the military proposals of the Republicans, and that is to take something like, you know, the MIT proposals or the Brookings proposals or something, and basically have the military budget, or cut it by 2/3, which is what sensible practice and you know, folks who used to write defense guidance summaries recommend. And that would liberate, you know, $200 billion or so that could be used educating children and doing something useful like that. On trade, we're into the idea of this leveling up rather than down business that I talked about, which puts us pretty squarely against GATT, not protectionist, for integration, but against GATT, and for some sort of social tariff thing and international worker rights. And those are initiatives, too, that neither of the major parties are particularly aggressively pursuing. So that would be an important difference, I think.
Pat, would you care to respond to this?
Well, just to say, if you want to make those changes, then there are some mechanisms by which you can do it. I just hold out that I think that we ought to use the mechanism that's going to be the most effective and is the closest at hand, and that is the Democratic Party. I think we ought to be registering those millions of people who, if they were registered and vote, would assure that Newt Gingrich will not be Speaker. Now, we can move around with fusion. We can create additional parties. We can have great debates. But until we get the people who are likely to vote Democratic to the polls to do so, who now don't turn out, Newt's going to continue to be Speaker. And so all of the thrashing and all of the talking and all of the fun does not reduce the military budget one penny. Electing Democrats to the Congress, Democrats of your stripe and my stripe, will. That's all. And it's quicker and easier and more efficient to do it than the existing structure. Now, does that mean there shouldn't be a new party or that you shouldn't have fusion or you shouldn't talk these things out? No. It means that during campaigns we got to quit dropping out, get in, get people registered, and get them to the polls and begin to make the kind of differences we want to make on the left.
Okay, Joel, 20 seconds, go.
If those who want to argue that we should diversify our political strategy, as we are arguing, if it's incumbent on them to show the plausibility of the new strategy that they're suggesting, and I've been at pains tonight to say that at least what we're doing is plausible, I do think it's incumbent on those who say, do it inside the Democrats and only inside the Democrats, and that's the easy way to go, and I win this argument before it begins because that's the most obvious way to go. It's incumbent on them to explain why we should possibly believe that, given the last 20 years of actual political experience.
Okay. Question?
Some of this relates to the frustrations that many people have with the Democratic Party, and so I want to send this question to Pat and Carolyn. People often feel that Democrats have no backbone. And I want to know what it's going to take to get leaders from the Democratic Party, or especially folks from like the Democratic Leadership Committee, to come out and walk a picket line with workers who are striking for fairness, or stand in front of trees that are about to be old growth forests that are about to be logged off for, you know, profit for Georgia Pacific or some other multinational. Thanks.
Well, I think that the greater percentage of my friends, especially from this town, march every day for whatever issue that you talk about. I don't know one of my Democratic friends in town here that don't care about workers, that don't care about the environment, that don't care about education, that don't care about democratic principles. I find it rather offensive that you would say those kinds of things.
I didn't suggest that. I just want to know when they're going to come out and actually stand up and confront those corporations head on and show them.
Do you not believe by the process that they're in currently now that they're not doing those things for you? Do you not believe on a day-by-day basis that they're not doing things? Have you requested them to come forth and do that process for you?
Yes, But I mean, someone like Al Gore, who instead of going and spending, raising money at $1,000 a plate dinners, is out, walking a picket line and having hot dogs with workers who are out there trying to protect themselves from, the boss who's got all the power. That's where my concern's coming from.
Well,
I personally think we need more national Democrats who do exactly that, elected Democrats who will do exactly that. Yeah. It's going to take downfield blocking from citizens who say, you do this, we'll go out and register voters for you. And then they're going to say to you, now wait a minute, are you going to be spending your time, energy, and money over here in this other party? And you say to them, no. You do that, and we're going to spend our time, energy, and money with you. But where are you when it comes to that? How many of you have gone to your elected officials and say, I want you to come and chain yourself to an old-growth tree, and if you do, I'll register 1,000 voters for you? Not one. And the politicians aren't going to do it until they know you're going to downfield block for them. They're not going to do it. And you don't downfield block for them, so they don't do it. It's that simple.
If you don't do what he says, Nixon's coming back to life.
I'm sorry, let's if you want to ask a question, go ahead and get in line.
Yeah, right.
Kelly?
I have my little questions here on my hand. My first comment is, while we've had some fun at the new party, and some of the people in the new party are some of the funnest people in town that I know, really I find it to be a hell of a lot of work. And it'd be a whole lot easier for me if the Democratic Party did a better job of representing me. So some of the Democrats are fun, and it's fun to party with some of them too. But the actual work of forming a party is way more work than it is fun. And I got a lot of work to do in my life. The second topic I want to talk about is the issue of not voting for Melcher, and I didn't vote for him. And I just couldn't. I just couldn't do it. That man is anti-choice, and that's like a bottom line issue. He's terrible. He was terrible on the environment. And Conrad Burns stinks, so, it's kind of hard. But he considered running for re-election. He called my house, or his people called my house and wanted to know if I would support him. And I said, no, he's anti-choice. They said, well, his daughter is pro-choice. You know that? I'm like, well, she should be running for office. This is very curious, and it brings back this point about the contract with the new party. The Democratic platform is pro-choice. It has always been pro-choice. And the party cannot hold its people, its highest-ranking people, its senators, to a basic party platform, which is a fundamental value of this country and with the majority of Americans' support. And here's a leading member of its party who cannot hold to a fundamental party platform value. And it's a bottom line issue for me. He wasn't good on a number of issues. And while, Conrad Burns is terrible on even more issues, at least I don't have to think he's one of us.
Pat, did you want to respond to that?
I have one more thing, and then I'll get out of your way. The last issue is this issue about voters and voter turnout. We have the historic low voter turnout. And I think Secchi's points are really good. When she talks to her members, and when I talk to people in the community about why they don't vote, and I always go out and vote, and I always have, but people feel like they don't have a significant choice. They feel that the parties are so corrupt. They feel there's no significant campaign finance reform. And quite frankly, I thought Bill Clinton was running as a Republican. I really did. I mean, I thought that was a Republican welfare bill. He was bad on gay and lesbian issues. He ran as a Republican. And you really could not tell the difference when you lined up what they said to the American public in their media packets and in everything they did. They looked a lot the same. And so we have a historic low voter turnout. If we don't do something to turn that around, the Democrats can never win. But somehow, we need to think about that. We have to be responsive to Secchi's members and others who say these parties are no different. They don't represent us at all, either of these parties.
Pat or Carolyn, would you like to respond? I want to, just for a second, I want to interject. How many people here are not members of the new party? Could you lift your hands up? I want to point something out. Everyone who has asked a question so far, I think, is a new party member. Not true?
Yeah.
You're not? Okay. Okay.
I just wanted for a minute to talk about 1968 again, because Pat brought that up and pointed out that in 1968 the progressives took a walk and we wound up with Richard Nixon. I remember 1968, even though I was only 16 years old. But what I remember was Hubert Humphrey was the establishment, and Mayor Daley was the establishment, and the establishment clubbed the heck out of us in the streets. They beat the crap out of us. And then to say, come on back home and join us, well, you know, it's just like getting beat up at home. You're not going to go back to an abusive father and mother. You're going to run away. And we as Democrats have to be very careful that we're not beating ourselves up. Because when you start beating up your constituents, they're going to run away. And they're not going to feel safe under this big umbrella. And I just want to leave that thought in all our minds, that because that's what's going on in Missoula. We're getting beat up because of what we're doing. And then, you know, people are wondering, why aren't you running back to the Democratic Party fold? Well, I don't feel like I've ever left it, but I do feel like I've been beat up a little bit.
I'd just like to comment or address a little bit some of the abandonment issues that are being, fed to us from the Democratic table. It seems to me a little astonishing that, Carolyn, you can comment on the fact that you're seeing some of your constituency defect, in essence, to some of these other parties that are out there. And I'm curious why you don't view this as an ideal that perhaps it's time for yourself or your party to start addressing some of these issues, and maybe that's why the defection is occurring. And perhaps we could register more Big D Democrats if you were addressing those issues, and where do you draw the line? And second of all, I guess that I'm a little confused, Mr. Williams, by your comment about the Democratic Party being this ever-growing and spawning entity, and that certainly seems to me like what the new party is. I mean, I think that it's things moving in the right direction for people with common values. And, you know, if it is an ongoing entity, perhaps this is merely another chapter thereof.
Carolyn?
I do participate in activities that do deal with groups of people as far as voter registration, those kinds of things. I happen to be president of the Missoula Area Trades and Labor Council. I help with phone banks, the Get Out to Vote efforts, those kinds of things, the minimum wage petition drives, food banks, all of those kinds of things, and do work to bringing those particular groups back into my part of the. So I'm not just talking your talk, I'm walking and doing your talk. And that's how I got involved in politics in the first place. The many years before was spaghetti sauce for fundraisers, Get Out to Vote phone calls and those kinds of things. But it's pretty sad when we call upon folks and ask them to participate in the process of the phone banks and they so choose not to do that. So therefore, that I find myself in a real dilemma as far as what am I going to do here? I mean, I can register all the folks, I can do all the fair booth registrations and all those kinds of things that I want, but and those people say, oh, you bet I want to get in there, I want to do that, call me, I'll do it. Excuse me, the football game's on, the World Series is on, I got to take Granny someplace. The priorities aren't the same when you get back away from your activity of where you've actually signed up to the card. So I think some of the responsibility needs to lie with the people who actually do the signing of the card. It's real easy to sign, but when you're called on, it's really not as easy to give up your time and activity with which to do that. So I've walked the talk, been there and done that on many a campaign, so I don't feel that I've not reached out to do that. Thank you.
Joe?
But just to pursue the same question again, this is not about new party versus Democrats. I think we've heard that the problems with the Democrats are that, voters are a little bit lazy, or the left which barely exists in America, has somehow, destroyed it, or that people are flocking from Democratic ranks into the ranks of this, completely fledgling new party. That's not the problem with the Democrats. The problem with the Democrats is that it's lost any sort of reliable hold on non-college educated white voters in America. And it's not going to do anything about that until it offers them some sort of economic program that improves their circumstances. And that's not a problem that the new party creates for the Democrats. That's a problem the Democrats have created for themselves. It's odd, I think, in this discussion that there's not sufficient direct address of that. The other thing that is blocking any sort of serious reform inside the Democratic Party that we've haven't seemed to focus on much here is this whole thing about money. I mean, the technologies of campaigning have changed, Pat, as you well know. And it used to be the case that, you know, organized people at some scale could substitute for the organized money. At this point, there's a lot much more organized money than organized people. And unless you get some way to make that money clean, you're basically running uphill steadily as a Democrat if you're trying to actually espouse those traditional democratic values. I mean, that's what makes the Democrats more and more business dominated, is because the technologies of the polling and the focus groups and then the TV and then the direct mail require a huge amount of cash. I mean, carried to an extreme level with this Lincoln bedroom stuff we've seen in the last election. But you know, look at the amount of leadership that anyone's provided in the Democratic Party on actually cleaning up that system. That, I think, is an abysmal failure. And that's, I think, something we'd agree on as an abysmal failure, and that stands in the way of any sort of authorship of a new Democratic Party politics or effectively a new party politics.
Pat, do you want to respond to that? Or?
Well, just let me, I want to be clear about one thing. When I said to all of you at the beginning that I have not been comfortable all these years defending the Democratic Party, my discomfort comes in part because of my recognition that the Democratic Party needs defending with a lot of folks now. And I'm saddened by that. But I don't want you to leave here thinking Pat Williams thinks the Democratic Party is perfect and really shouldn't have to defend it. I am troubled because I have to defend this party. And the reason I have to defend it so often is because it's not progressive enough anymore. I understand that. Look, if most of you in this room had been in my place in the Congress in the last 18 years, your voting record and the one I cast for those 18 years would be very similar. We're sort of on the same side in this.
And that's why you have Nixon. Right.
That's how you ended up with Helms.
Go ahead.
I think we all see enough negativity during the political campaign season that I don't want to be part of that on a night when everyone must-see TV to come to a political meeting. But with that in mind, I do want to say that I'm here tonight as a member of the College Democrats, and we were very active last fall campaigning, acting on our common values, pounding Carolyn signs, making phone calls for Bill Yellowtail, and acting with manpower, not with money. And we're doing phone calls to our legislators this season to try to preserve our coal tax money and try to help the legislators enact some primary aggressor legislation that will benefit victims of domestic violence. And what I want to add to the discussion tonight is that the Democratic Party is very much alive. And for those who want to join, my phone number is 728-8984. And give me a call if you want to be part of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I don't think they got the number. Give them the number again.
728-8984.
Okay.
Thanks.
Really should be very proud of John and his leadership as far as the Young Democrats are concerned. That group's about 60 or 70 persons strong at this moment, and they were a vital support mechanism to us, and many of them are sitting up at the back. And I'm really proud to have been, have you work on my campaign and try to champion your causes in Helena. Thank you very much.
What do they say? Once a... Oh, there it is. There it is.
Once a what?
Okay. Your question?
I have a question specifically for Carolyn Squires.
That's a good.
I'd also like to hear Joel's opinion on it.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Can you start again?
Sorry.
Sure.
I'm so distracted by Pat writing behind us.
I have a question that's specifically for Carolyn Squires, but I'd also like to hear Joel's opinion on it. It concerns campaign finance reform. Right now in Montana, we have $100 campaign spending limits, and that was set because of Initiative 118, which passed in '94, and it was aimed at reducing the skyrocketing amount of money that's been in Montana elections. It was also aimed at reducing the influence of the wealthy and PACs and enabling a larger number of contributors to partake in the elections process, because it's a lower figure that more people can afford. So I'm just curious as to how you feel about $100 spending limits, especially now because that is actually being challenged.
Well, it was a hard campaign for me in the respect that my husband is a mill worker and I am a licensed practical nurse. I don't have large amounts of money. I don't have a resource to go to or a savings account to go to funnel money into my campaign. This campaign was more challenging financially than others have been in the past. I think people have forgotten that printing costs go up, sign costs go up, and inflation takes over in the area of campaigning as well as any place else in the marketplace. And I don't think that people gave us much credit in regards to the inflation factor. The PAC limits went up proportionately with a small increase. The $100 limit was difficult to reach. I mean, I did a lot more fundraising, spending more time fundraising than I did in the past as far as that goes. I understand what people were saying. I know that they didn't want to buy, but when the loophole is in place that an individual who has enough money can pump into a campaign $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 without any impact versus myself, who is the blue and pink collar worker in my neighborhood, I find that to be a little difficult to swallow. So yes, I believe in the campaign finance reform. I believe that races should be held to a limit, but there will be a bill coming possibly out of the legislature with some restructuring of some statewide races and recommendations for that coming out of the legislature. There may be a bill that comes out to increase those limits to $200. I'm not sure that that will occur, but that's in the process. I think I probably would support that, and just due to the fact of where my financial income comes from. I think
well, new party is for some significant public financing of elections. And I think that the sort of consensus view that's out there, that the way to afford doing that and so on, we need to have ideally contribution limits set at some level that ordinary citizens could in fact achieve, and then make the move on Buckley v. Vallejo that's needed to sustain those in the courts if need be, a constitutional amendment or a threat thereof. Something that would enable people making small contributions to combine their contributions, so small people PACs, as it were. Some way to reduce the cost of campaigning by simply allocating a certain number of hours into a free TV fund so you wouldn't have these skyrocketing costs driven off the TV stuff. And then some way to get clean money into the system. Ideally, we think in a decentralized way, ideally through tax credits of the sort that they do in Oregon and in Canada. And on that system, you could, at a cost per individual voter of about $10 a year, have a completely clean system in which maximum contributions could be set extremely low, say $50, and do that with the tax credit as well. And all those things also poll in the 70% plus range. What doesn't poll, what people are not attracted to, is the idea of just doing public financing out of general revenues and just giving it over to politicians. They don't like that. But maybe, leaving the details aside, at risk of pounding the table or getting on a high horse or being a jerk or whatever, we'd just like to underscore the enormity of this issue. I mean, this is not a technical issue. This is like the slavery issue of our time in some ways. And the technique of it and all the press that's been wasted on and the lack of popular mobilization around it maybe distract us from this fact. I mean, you cannot now run, seriously, for Congress in a reasonably populous state unless you've got $300,000 at your disposal. And you can't really do a Senate campaign if you've got less than $4 or $5 million. And unless you find people who can, put you in touch with that sort of money or are in touch with that sort of money yourself, you're basically lost. We can't call ourselves a democracy in which elections are in this way for sale, just as we couldn't call ourselves a republic before when we were half slave and half free. And I think there are a huge number of talented people who love their country, love to run for office, get good ideas and stamina, and are just being shut out of this system. This money thing is a big damn thing. And one of the greatest frustrations that I have, and I know lots of people in the party have, is that there is something where there just has not been leadership from any major institutional players. This is disgusting. I mean, we're just blowing our country here.
Okay, we're actually out of time, but we'll take one more question before we wrap up.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, Rand.
First of all, I just want to make sure that Representative Williams doesn't hold any of my comments against me, so since you do have a grade to hold over me. I guess, first of all, this is the first time I've ever had learned anything about the new party, but I want to say that first, that I think it's really important. Dissent is very important. I think it was Senator Fulbright said that it was the most patriotic thing we can do, and it seems positive to me. And I just wanted to ask Joel Rogers that, why fusion instead of maybe a proportional voting system? Or and also, do you think that the three things that I think are important to our democracy right now that would bring about change is, first of all, something we've hit on is higher voter turnout, but also more women representatives and more minority representatives. And do you think that a fusion voting system will bring about that type of change?
Why fusion rather than proportional representation? No reason at all. We'd love to see proportional representation, but the U.S. historically, outside of some cities, has never had serious proportional representation. It has had fusion, and so we thought that that was the easier American answer, or easier reform that was accessible to us. Fusion is, in effect, the peculiar American answer within a winner-take-all system to the question that in proportional representation systems is answered by them, namely, how do you give real weight to minority, understood arithmetically here, electoral sentiment? And so, we thought we'd start there. And maybe that'll be enough to end there. I think, didn't you introduce something that sort of looked like PR at one point? I guess this is before your fear about turning us into Brazil?
No,
Actually,
I was a progressive then, too. When I did
Okay, that's it. I'd like to thank you all for coming.
There's a little known fact about Pat, but he has this PR bill that was lost somewhere. It never reported out of committee, but, it said, bring back Nixon bill. And, it's the,
I've been asked to announce that... Huh?
Can I just finish the answer?
Go ahead.
All right, but on women and minorities and more people who look like the rest of America running for office. One thing that we're pleased with is that we are in fact running the nurse, not the lawyer, running the mechanic, not. And the numbers on our membership are matched by our candidates. Half our candidates are women. We've never gotten a dime from Emily's list, but we've elected a lot of women, and about a third of our candidates are of color. So we're throwing lots of folks like that is like us, into electoral politics.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much for coming.
Hey, great America.